What you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about global power. In the last 72 hours, something unprecedented has happened. Something that has sent shockwaves through Washington, Beijing, and every major capital around the world. Nicolas Maduro, the man who defied America for over a decade, the leader who turned Venezuela into China's most strategic foothold in the Western Hemisphere, has been captured. And right now, as I speak these words, the Pentagon is in full panic mode. Because this isn't just about Venezuela. This isn't just about one dictator falling. This is about the complete collapse of China's carefully constructed empire in Latin America. And what's coming next could reshape the entire global order. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the next 30 days could be the most dangerous period in modern geopolitical history. Before we dive into what's happening right now, you need to understand why Venezuela matters so much. For years, mainstream media has treated Venezuela as a sideshow, a failing socialist state, a humanitarian crisis, nothing more. But here's what they've deliberately hidden from you. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Russia, larger than anyone. And for the past 15 years, China has been quietly positioning itself to control every single drop of that oil. We're talking about over $60 billion in loans and investments. We're talking about military agreements, intelligence sharing, strategic partnerships that have turned Venezuela into China's AI aircraft carrier in America's backyard. This was Beijing's master plan. Build an empire right under Washington's nose. Create a network of influence that stretches from Caracas to Havana to Managua. And for years, it worked. But now, everything is falling apart. And the speed of this collapse has caught everyone, including the Pentagon, completely off guard. Let me show you exactly what happened. The situation in Venezuela has been deteriorating for months. But what happened in the last week has accelerated everything beyond anyone's predictions. After the disputed elections, Maduro's grip on power began to slip. The opposition, led by forces that have been planning this moment for years, finally made their move. Intelligence sources are now confirming that key military commanders, the same generals who kept Maduro in power, have switched sides. And here's the part that should terrify Beijing. These weren't random defections. This was a coordinated operation, an operation that has Maduro now in custody, facing charges that could see him extradited to the United States. But let me be crystal clear about something. This capture wasn't just about justice. This wasn't about democracy. This was a strategic strike aimed directly at China's heart. You see, Maduro wasn't just Venezuela's president. He was China's gatekeeper, the man who ensured Beijing's investments were protected, the man who kept American influence out of the most oil-rich nation in the Western Hemisphere. Without Maduro, China's entire Latin American strategy is now in free fall. And the numbers tell the story. China has invested over $60 billion in Venezuela since 2007. They've built refineries. They've constructed ports. They've established military-grade communication networks. All of that is now at risk. Because the new transitional government has already made one thing absolutely clear. They are reviewing every Chinese contract, every agreement, every deal that Maduro signed. And multiple sources inside Caracas are telling us that at least 70% of those contracts are expected to be canceled or renegotiated. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars gone. But this is just the beginning, because what's happening in Venezuela is triggering a chain reaction that extends far beyond South America. To understand why Beijing is in crisis mode right now, you need to see the bigger picture. Venezuela was never just about oil for China. It was the anchor of their entire Latin American strategy. Through Venezuela, China built relationships with Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and a dozen other nations across the region. Through Venezuela, they established port access, military agreements, and intelligence networks that gave them unprecedented influence in America's traditional sphere of influence. And through Venezuela, they demonstrated to the world that you could defy America and survive, that there was an alternative to Washington, that China would protect its allies. That message, that belief, is now shattered. Because here's what's happening right now across Latin America. In Ecuador, the government is freezing Chinese mining projects worth $4 billion. Officials are citing security concerns and environmental reviews. But we all know what this really means. In Argentina, the new administration has just announced they are rejecting a planned Chinese military base, a base that would have given Beijing its first permanent military presence in South America. In Peru, Chinese copper investments totaling $15 billion are now under comprehensive review. Local protests against Chinese mining operations have doubled in the past month. And in Brazil, the largest economy in Latin America, President Lula is suddenly finding reasons to delay multiple Chinese infrastructure projects. Do you see the pattern? Every nation that was watching Venezuela, every leader who was considering closer ties with Beijing, Every government that thought China could protect them from American pressure, they're all now reconsidering. Because Maduro's capture proves something that China desperately didn't want the world to see. When push comes to shove, Beijing cannot protect its allies. They couldn't save Maduro. They couldn't prevent the collapse. And they can't stop the domino effect that's now spreading across the entire region. This is what a crumbling empire looks like. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with a cascade of cancellations, reviews, delays, and abandoned projects. And the financial impact is staggering. Conservative estimates suggest China could lose access to $200 billion in Latin American investments over the next 5 years if this trend continues. $200 billion. That's not just money. That's decades of strategic positioning. That's ports, railways, power plants, and communication networks. That's influence. That's power. And it's slipping through Beijing's fingers faster than they can respond. Now, you might be thinking, if China is losing its grip on Latin America, shouldn't Washington be celebrating? And on the surface, yes, this looks like a massive victory for American interests. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you. Here's why the Pentagon is in full panic mode despite this apparent win. The collapse is happening too fast. You see, in geopolitics, control transitions are manageable. Gradual shifts in power can be planned for. Slow changes give time for diplomacy, for negotiations, for strategic positioning. But what's happening now? This is chaos. And chaos creates opportunities not just for America, but for everyone. Here's the Pentagon's nightmare scenario. As China's influence collapses, a power vacuum is emerging across Latin America, a vacuum that multiple actors are now racing to fill. Russia is already moving. In the past 10 days, Russian diplomatic delegations have visited Nicaragua, Cuba, and Bolivia. Moscow sees an opportunity to expand its own influence, while China is distracted. Iran is mobilizing. Intelligence reports suggest increased Hezbollah activity in the tri-border region between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Tehran wants to maintain its foothold in the Western Hemisphere, regardless of what happens to Chinese influence. And drug cartels, already powerful, are sensing weakness. The transitional chaos in Venezuela is creating new smuggling routes, new opportunities for illicit networks to expand. The Pentagon is now facing a situation where they might have to deploy resources to multiple crisis points simultaneously. But it gets worse. Because China isn't going to accept this defeat quietly. Beijing has already signaled that they view the events in Venezuela as American interference. And they're preparing to respond? Intelligence analysts are warning that China may accelerate its timeline in Taiwan. The logic is terrifying but simple. If Beijing believes America is distracted by Latin American chaos, they might see a window of opportunity to move on Taiwan. We're already seeing increased military activity in the South China Sea. Chinese naval exercises have tripled in the past 2 weeks. Fighter jet incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone are at record levels. The Pentagon is now wargaming scenarios where they have to respond to multiple crises simultaneously, stabilizing Latin America while deterring Chinese aggression in Asia. And here's the brutal truth. They don't have the resources to do both effectively. America's military is already stretched thin. Budget constraints, recruitment challenges, and ongoing commitments in Europe and the Middle East have left the Pentagon with fewer options than they'd like to admit. So yes, Maduro's capture is a strategic win, but it's a win that comes with massive risks. Risks that could spiral into something far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. While the military implications grab headlines, there's another battle happening that most people are completely missing. The economic war. China's response to the Venezuela situation has been swift and aggressive, not with missiles, but with money. In the past week, Chinese state banks have begun selling U.S. Treasury bonds at an accelerated rate. We're talking about $40 billion in sales, the largest single-week disposal in over a decade. This is economic warfare. By dumping U.S. debt, China is attempting to destabilize American financial markets. They're trying to raise U.S. borrowing costs. They're trying to create pain that will force Washington to reconsider its Latin American strategy. And it's working, at least partially. U.S. Treasury yields have spiked. The dollar has weakened against major currencies. Stock markets have experienced increased volatility. But here's where it gets really interesting. China is simultaneously accelerating its de-dollarization efforts across Latin America. Beijing is offering emergency credit lines to any nation willing to trade in yuan instead of dollars. They're providing debt relief to countries that commit to maintaining Chinese projects. They're essentially trying to buy their way back into influence. It's a desperate move, but desperation can be dangerous. Because if China succeeds in establishing alternative payment systems across Latin America, the long-term implications for American economic dominance are severe. We're not just talking about losing influence in one region. We're talking about the beginning of a global shift away from dollar hegemony. And that would be a loss that makes Venezuela look like nothing. The next 30 days will determine which way this goes. Will China's economic offensive succeed? Will nations choose short-term Chinese money over long-term American partnership? Or will the Venezuela effect spread, convincing more nations that aligning with China is simply too risky? So, where does this all lead? What should you be watching for in the coming weeks? Based on everything we've analyzed, here are the critical developments to monitor. First, watch for Chinese military movements in the South China Sea. If Beijing decides to accelerate its Taiwan timeline, we'll see the signs within the next 30 days. Increased naval deployments, expanded air patrols, and economic pressure on Taiwan will be the warning indicators. Second, monitor Latin American elections and political shifts. Several key nations have elections coming up in the next 6 months. The Venezuela effect will absolutely influence those outcomes. Pro-China candidates are now facing serious headwinds. Third, track the economic indicators. U.S. Treasury yields, dollar strength, and commodity prices will tell you whether China's financial warfare is succeeding or failing. Fourth, pay attention to Russia's moves. Moscow sees opportunity in this chaos. Any expansion of Russian influence in Latin America will complicate Pentagon planning significantly. And fifth, watch Venezuela itself. The transitional government's decisions in the coming weeks will set the template for how other nations handle their Chinese relationships. This is a pivotal moment, a moment where decades of strategic positioning are being undone in real time. And whatever happens next will reshape the global order for generations to come. Let me leave you with this. What we're witnessing right now is not just a political crisis in Venezuela. It's not just a setback for China. It's not just a challenge for the Pentagon. This is a turning point. The old order, where China steadily expanded its influence while America watched, is ending. But what replaces it? That's still being written. And the decisions made in the next few weeks will determine whether we're heading towards stability or something far more dangerous. The Pentagon is in panic because they understand what's at stake. They understand that this moment of chaos could easily spiral into something uncontrollable. And they understand that America's response right now will shape the next decade of global politics. Maduro's capture was just the first domino. The question now is, how many more will fall? If you want to stay informed as this situation develops, and believe me, it will develop rapidly, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because the next video we release could be the most important one yet. This is Conflict Decoded, and we'll see you in the next analysis. Thanks for watching. Share this video if you think others need to understand what's really happening. And remember, in a world of chaos, knowledge is power. Until next time,